Deep in the heart of the Appalachian Mountains, there are places people whisper about, but never dare to visit. Trails that seem ordinary by day, but turn into something unexplainable when the sun disappears. For centuries, hikers, travelers, and locals have shared terrifying accounts of what lurks in these woods. From strange voices echoing through the fog, to shadows that stalk your every step. To traps hidden in the earth itself, waiting for their next victim. These aren't legends. They're not campfire tales meant to entertain. They are true stories. Disturbing encounters that have been passed down, reported, and experienced by real people. And tonight, you're going to hear 6 of them. But before we begin, let me warn you, these stories are not easy to forget. Once you hear them, you'll think twice before stepping onto an Appalachian trail again. And if you're watching alone in the dark, you may want to check behind you, because sometimes what hides in the shadows doesn't stay there. Welcome to Scary Dark Narrations, where the most terrifying true horror stories come alive. If you love chilling tales, if you crave the kind of fear that lingers long after the screen fades, then this is the place for you. Make sure to subscribe right now and turn on notifications, because in the darkness of the Appalachian Mountains, even the smallest sound could mean something is watching. And trust me, you don't want to miss what's coming next. Now, let's begin. These are 6 disturbing and scary true Appalachian Mountains horror stories. The mansion's restless secrets, okay? So what I'm about to tell you is something that's still happening as I write this. It's something that really unsettles me. Not just because it's happening in my own home, the one place that's supposed to be safe, but also because I genuinely can't explain it. No matter how hard I try to reason it out, no matter how much I rely on logic, every attempt ends in a dead end. That's why I'm turning to you. Not because I expect answers, but maybe just to feel like I'm not completely alone in this frustrating attempt to make sense of the absurd. The truth is, it all started about 5 years ago, when I decided to buy an old mansion deep in the Appalachian Mountains. It seemed perfect for what I was looking for, steeped in history, full of old architecture, and although there were several details that weren't disclosed up front, including its exact location, which I legally can't reveal due to a confidentiality agreement, I now, in hindsight, realize I should never have signed. I still believe that anyone from the area, or anyone who's seen some of the YouTube videos going around, probably knows exactly which house I'm talking about, or at least the general area. The mansion isn't isolated. There are others like it in this region. It's just for some context so you don't think I'm completely insane for buying an old mansion out here. There's a very specific reason I wanted it. I'm a historian, and I've always been deeply fascinated by old houses. Not just their architecture or the way they withstand time, but because they tell stories. Stories about the people who lived in them, the families who came and went, and the secrets they buried in their rooms, their halls, and their attics. I've always believed a house can be a direct reflection of a family's social standing, its ambitions, and its eventual downfalls. Most of my research focuses exactly on that, the buried secrets of once powerful families. When I saw the mansion, or rather this isolated manor, I didn't hesitate. The price was unbelievably low. And even though the place was in terrible condition for a structure over 200 years old, something about it pulled at me. It felt like the house was waiting for someone who understood it. And since I have no family and a stable financial life, I jumped at the opportunity without thinking too much. Today, just a few months after moving in, I see that as a huge mistake. Even though I bought it 5 years ago, I only moved in this year. The renovations were constantly delayed. Construction crews kept quitting. Some never returned after the first visit, and others walked off mid-project without much explanation, only saying the atmosphere was too heavy. While I tried to rationalize it, chalk it up to travel fatigue or the overactive imagination of superstitious people, I started to realize there was something going on that I just couldn't ignore. For context, the property is surrounded by a vast forest, and because it's classified as protected land, no new construction is allowed there. That was said to be one of the main reasons the house was so cheap. But since my interest was strictly the mansion and its history, that didn't bother me at all. The first few months in the house were strangely quiet. Not because there weren't any sounds, but because everything felt frozen. like time had stopped inside. Even the natural sounds of the forest kept their distance, like nature itself refused to come too close. And it was in that strange stillness that the little things began. Small events that at first I tried to dismiss as distraction or fatigue. The first time I noticed something really odd, actually unsettling, was when one of my kitchen knives went missing. Not just any knife, but one of the largest ones. The kind you don't just misplace. I found it days later sitting on top of the bookshelf in my office, right next to an old letter opener I'd been using to examine historic documents. And although I found it strange, I blamed it on exhaustion. Long hours spent organizing archives and decoding old records. Maybe I'd grab the knife for opening packages. It wasn't that far-fetched. But then a pair of scissors disappeared from my nightstand and reappeared days later next to the upstairs bathroom sink, a bathroom I rarely ever use. That's when I really started to pay attention. I began noticing that whenever something went missing, it always turned up later. Always in parts of the house I didn't frequent, as if someone or something wanted me to know they were aware of my routines, more than I was comfortable admitting. I know it sounds bizarre and unsettling, but that's exactly how it felt. In fact, it's how I feel now as I sit here writing this from inside the mansion. Like anyone in my position, I started sleeping poorly. I'd wake up in the middle of the night with the distinct sensation that someone else was in the house. But I never heard footsteps, never found open doors. And yet, paranoia began to creep in. That's when I started wondering if someone was somehow getting inside, trying to scare me into leaving, maybe hoping I'd sell the house for even less than what I paid. As far-fetched as that idea sounds, it was the only explanation that seemed remotely rational. Things got worse one night while I was already in bed. Doors and windows all locked, something I did religiously. That night I heard 3 solid knocks on my bedroom door. There's no way to describe the terror I felt in that moment. If everything was locked from the inside, then who the hell was outside my door? My heart was racing as I lay there, frozen, not moving, like a kid too afraid to look under the bed. I only got up once the police arrived. After a panicked, trembling phone call, they searched the entire house, found nothing. No signs of forced entry, no footprints, nothing. I know they weren't trying to dismiss me, but I couldn't help feeling embarrassed, like a scared child needing attention. A few days later, feeling completely drained, I decided to go into town. I needed to pick up some basics. Bread, rice, the usual. But more than anything, I needed to breathe, see people, get out of that house. I stopped by the usual grocery store and got into a casual chat with Mr. Charles Ann, older man who's been there forever and pretty much knows the entire history of the town. At one point, without thinking much, I mentioned I'd been living in the mansion up on the hill. As soon as I said it, he stopped arranging apples, froze, and looked at me with this strange expression. It wasn't fear like you see in movies, but it was in simple curiosity, either like he'd heard this story before too many times and already knew how it ended. That's when he told me quietly, like he didn't want the spirits to hear. He said that house has an old reputation, one that goes back generations, that everyone who's ever lived there, and there haven't been many, eventually disappeared. No trace, as if the earth swallowed them whole. Then the house would pass to their children, who did everything they could to get rid of it as fast as possible. And those brave or foolish enough to buy it next, they disappeared too. Same pattern. The strangest part, according to him, isn't the house itself, it's the forest around it. He explained that, according to the old folks, that patch of land never accepted the mansion's presence. It was like the house was built in a place that already had an owner. And knowing the history of these mountains, it did. What's truly frightening, he said, isn't ghosts inside the house. It's the ancient presences out there among the trees. Beings that have always lived in the forest, that don't like intruders, that do unforget, and that wait for new occupants with a patience that doesn't belong to this world. I came back home with my head spinning. What Mr. Charles told me, it made sense. That's what disturbed me most. Because everything I'd been feeling, the misplaced objects, the knocks at odd hours, the constant sense of being watched, fit that story too well. Like for the first time, someone had put into words what I couldn't explain. And yet, it clashed with everything I believe in. I've always been rational, grounded. I don't believe in spirits, curses, or hidden forces. And yet there's something here I can't explain, something I can't make fit into logic, no matter how hard I try. How do you deal with that when what you feel confirms the impossible? I just sat there on the porch staring at the tree line, not knowing whether what scared me more was what might be out there or the fact that I no longer trusted my own understanding of reality. Now, as I write these lines, I know I can't stay here. I need to leave. But I also can't bring myself to sell this house to someone else without telling them what's going on. Because no matter how cheap it is, no price is worth the kind of dread that comes with living in a place where you don't know if you're alone, where every creak could be more than just settling wood. And that's why I'm stuck paralyzed. Because this house doesn't want to be abandoned, but it refuses to be lived in. And I'm here trapped in the middle of that contradiction, afraid something might happen to me. The ruins desperate echo this story didn't happen to me. It happened to my father over 35 years ago, deep in the Great Smoky Mountains, back when he was in his 20s, and spent much of his free time hiking. He rarely speaks of it, and for years all I knew were fragments passed down through my late uncle. But a few days ago, my father finally told me everything. I don't think he did it for closure. I think he wanted me to understand why some places should be left alone. Not that he wants to stop me from exploring these mountains, but he just wants to make it clear that if I do explore them, I should do so with respect to the people who came before and take all possible precautions. He was 24 when he and my uncle, who has since passed, set out on an 8-day hiking trip. They were aiming to reach a little-known ghost town tucked in an overgrown part of the mountains. A site whispered about by locals said to produce strange noises at night, the kind of place that draws in the curious, the skeptical, and the naive. It was early spring, cold enough at night to make you grateful for a fire, but warm enough during the day to hike comfortably. Not long before their trip, there had been news of a missing person, a man who had ventured into the same area alone 2 months earlier and never returned. A search was launched, but resources were limited back then, and the effort had long since ended. No one expected to find him alive. In fact, this part of the country is well known for its disappearances. Disappearances that often don't even make it to the public or get reported. My dad and uncle were eager, full of the kind of restless energy that makes you brave or stupid depending on the outcome. They mapped their route carefully and began their ascent. The first few days were calm. The ruins were fascinating. Crumbled stone foundations, broken walls, remnants of another time. They explored sketched layouts and camped at a respectful distance. The forest had its own kind of rhythm, calm and steady during the day, restless and alive at night. You could hear the birds, which wasn't just peaceful, it was beautiful. But at night, that's when the real noise began. A whole set of insects that had stayed quiet during the day started their routines. On the third night, my father had a dream that he was being watched eyes in the dark, whispers brushing against his ears. He woke up in a sweat, heart racing, convinced someone had been standing just beyond the firelight. Obviously, it had just been a dream, or at least he thought it had been. After waking up and realizing everything was fine, he went back to sleep. My uncle seemed distant the next morning. He hadn't slept well either, and neither of them said it, but they both felt the same thing. They also noticed a set of footprints close to where they had camped. The tracks were fresh, clearly made during the night. That alone wasn't alarming. Lots of people visited those ruins and explored the mountains. So, even though they hadn't run into anyone yet, it didn't mean they wouldn't eventually. What made them uneasy was feeling that way at night, a time when people are most vulnerable. And that's what disturbed them the most about the footprints. They had been left while they slept, when neither of them would have been able to see or hear a thing. That day they were headed to explore some new ruins, and honestly they were excited about it. Those were supposedly the ones that made the most noise at night. An old woman told them about it at a small grocery store. While they were buying some fruit for the hike, she said that 248 years ago, an entire family had been sacrificed there, and ever since the place had been abandoned. According to her, no one in their right mind went near it. They loved the story. They didn't believe in superstitions, and that was exactly why they had chosen to go. Up to that point, they hadn't seen or heard anything strange. No sounds, no movement, no signs of life, other than the kind that already lived in the forest and those footprints. They could already see the structure coming into view when, as they got closer, they started to hear a sound like someone whispering and crying at the same time. A low, drawn-out kind of crying, full of pain. They immediately looked at each other and moved toward the noise. It clearly sounded like someone in distress. That's when, after their eyes adjusted to the dark, they saw a man in the corner of the ruins. He was shirtless, back turned to them. Skin was filthy, covered in scratches and bruises.
Boys.
His pants were torn and soaked in dried blood. He didn't react to them, didn't turn, but the sounds they heard were coming from him. He didn't understand why he was making those sounds, so they approached cautiously. That's when they were horrified by what they saw the man doing. He was biting his own arm, completely unaware that there were two other people there with him. As soon as my father and uncle realized the man wasn't well and could be dangerous, they backed away. Once outside talking to each other, they started to think he might be the same man who had been reported missing in that area 2 months earlier. They couldn't just leave him there, but they also couldn't put themselves at risk. They left some food and water at the entrance of the ruins and started making their way down the mountain to alert the police and ask for help. When the search and rescue team found him, he was barely alive, severely dehydrated. His body covered in lacerations, burns, and old wounds. His arm was mauled, ravaged by his own teeth, and there was more blood in the ruin. Blood that wasn't his, but was later confirmed to belong to someone else. From what my father and uncle learned, the man never fully recovered. And in fact, no one ever knew what had happened to him during those 2 months. He was out there alone, without food or water. His wife said that sometimes during the night, he would wake her up and tell her to hide, that the man was coming and she needed to hide. No matter how much she tried to calm him down with words or understand him, he only calmed down when she played along with the fantasy and hid. He never returned to being the same. My father and uncle never went back to the Smokies. I grew up in a hollow deep in the Appalachian Mountains, a place where the air felt older than time itself. Our house sat at the end of a gravel road that washed into mud whenever the rain came, and behind it stretched a wall of thick, unbroken woods. Those trees were the kind that swallowed sound, the kind that made you feel like you were being watched even when you were alone. My mom had left when I was 5, just a shadow in my memory, and my father was nothing more than a blank space on my birth certificate.
Right.
It was my grandparents who raised me, holding the family together on Grandpa's meager disability checks and whatever the land would give us. We weren't wealthy, but survival was stitched into us. What I remember most about those years is Grandpa's voice. At night, by the wood stove, he'd spin story tales older than the hills. Some were about the Cherokee, some about feuds and blood spilled generations ago, but the ones that stayed with me were about what lived in the dark hollows. His favorite was something he called the Screecher, older than us. Older than everything here, he'd whisper, lowering his voice like even speaking of it carried risk. He said it was part bear, part wolf, but wrong somehow, too big, too twisted. Its cry, he told me, could freeze the blood in your veins. You'd hear it only on new moon nights, when the sky was black as coal. If it's screaming, he said, you're safe. But if it stops, he would let the silence stretch until I felt my heart in my throat. That means it's watching you. At first I thought it was just a ghost story, the kind meant to thrill kids before bed. But I never missed the flicker in Grandpa's eyes when he told it. He wasn't just trying to scare me, he was warning me. All those new moon nights my grandparents changed. Grandma checked the locks 3, sometimes 4 times. Grandpa dragged in extra wood and stayed close to the gun that hung above the fireplace. And I was never, ever allowed outside after dark. I was 9 when I heard it for the first time. It was late October, the kind of cold night that makes every board in an old house groan. I was drifting off when the sound came low at first, like the wind, then rising into something unearthly. It wasn't a wolf, not a coyote. It was a broken, grating shriek, almost like words twisted into something inhuman. It made my skin crawl, made me feel like my bones wanted to climb out of me. I ran to my grandparents' room, only to find them already awake. Grandma pulled me close without a word, her face pale. Grandpa was at the window, peering through a slit in the curtain. When he finally turned, he was holding the shotgun, the same one that usually collected dust above the mantel. I'd never seen fear in his face before that night. The sound carried on until dawn, sometimes distant, sometimes so close it rattled the glass in the windows. And when the first light bled across the ridge, it stopped. Just like that, as Grandpa fell asleep in his chair, the shotgun across his knees, and Grandma cooked waffles like she was trying to erase the night, but she never denied it happened. She just said, some things don't need talking about in daylight. I started keeping track of the moon after that, circling dates in pencil on an old calendar. On new moons, I shut myself in early, curtains drawn, ears straining for a sound I hoped never to hear again. For years, nothing came, not after Grandpa passed from a heart attack, not as Grandma grew older and weaker. I started to wonder if maybe the Screecher had gone with him, if the story had died the night he did. But the spring I turned 14, I found out the truth hadn't gone anywhere. It was April, during spring break, when my friend Jess came to stay over. She was a city girl, all wide eyes and laughter, and to her, my home was the kind of wild she only saw in movies. We spent the day in the woods exploring trails and creeks, talking about boys and futures that felt far away. I should have been watching the sun, but for the first time in years, I'd forgotten the calendar. By the time we realized the light was draining from the trees, it was too late. We were halfway down the path toward home when the first sound came, a low, grating shriek that clawed through the silence. I froze where I stood. That cry wasn't memory, wasn't imagination, it was real. Jess tilted her head, confused. "Probably just a cat," she said. My throat tightened. "That's not a cat," I whispered. "Run." At first she laughed, thinking I was teasing. But then another cry split the air, closer, sharper, and the woods fell deathly silent. No wind, no crickets. No birds, just us and something else. The ground shook with a heavy thud behind us, the kind of weight no human could carry. Slowly I turned. I couldn't see it, but I heard it dragged wet breathing between the trees. We ran, branches tore at us, as the last of the light bled away. My chest burned, legs screamed, but ahead, I saw the glow of our kitchen light in the hollow. For a second, I thought we might make it. Then came the blast, a thunder crack that split the air, and bark exploded from a tree beside me. Jess screamed, but when I looked up, it wasn't the creature. It was Grandma, standing in the yard, the shotgun shaking in her hands. "Get inside," she yelled, her voice sharper than I'd ever heard. We stumbled onto the porch as she slammed the door behind us, bolting it fast. Her hands were trembling as she set the gun down. "Out this late," she hissed, "on a new moon?" I tried to explain, tried to say I'd forgotten, but her face had gone pale, her eyes far away. She told Jess what it was, the same story Grandpa had told me. The Screecher. The cry meant distance. The silence meant it was hunting. And tonight, she said. She had seen it, just a shape in the dark when we broke from the trees, tall, misshapen, moving wrong. We stayed up all night, the screeches circling the house. Sometimes it sounded like it was on the ridge, sometimes right outside the wall. Jess clutched her blanket like a child, eyes wide with disbelief. By morning, the cries had faded, and sunlight poured across the hollow, as if nothing had happened. Jess left the next day, trying to laugh it off, though I caught the tremor in her voice when she said she'd never forget it. She never came back for another sleepover. For the rest of that year, Grandma set a rule: no going out after 4 on new moon days. I obeyed. I didn't need reminding. The sound haunted me, followed me into dreams, left me waking with my heart hammering. I moved away after high school, left those woods behind for the city. But no matter where I go, when the night is quiet and the moon is gone from the sky, I find myself listening, waiting, because Grandpa was right. The Screecher isn't just a story. One day when the cries finally stop altogether, I know it'll be close. The first time I ever felt true fear in the woods, it wasn't from a bear, a cougar, or even another hunter with poor aim. It was something else. Something that even now, 10 years later, still crawls into my dreams when the nights grow long and the air turns sharp with November chill. My husband and I started hunting together not long after we married. Both of us were raised in the deep folds of rural West Virginia, where the rhythm of life was measured by hunting season, and where the silence of the woods was something you grew up respecting. Every fall, we'd rent a small cabin from an old man named Gus. He was the type who spoke slow, watched everything with sharp eyes, and traded firewood and shelter for nothing more than a few bags of venison jerky. He liked us, said we reminded him of himself and his late wife back in the day. Most years were uneventful. Long mornings in a blind, thermos coffee steaming, waiting on bucks that either never came or came in smaller than we'd hoped. Nothing unusual, nothing we couldn't laugh about on the drive home. But November of 2015 was different. It started like all the others, but by the fourth day, we had seen almost nothing. The woods were quiet, too quiet. Even the birds seemed to have moved on, leaving only a stillness that pressed down on us the longer we sat there. That morning, we pushed farther west, into a patch of woods Gus had once mentioned, but never encouraged us to visit. It was older growth, thick and wild, the kind of place where even daylight feels like dusk. We set up our blind just as dawn painted the horizon pale gray. For hours, nothing moved. Not a deer, not a squirrel, nothing but the occasional groan of the wind through the branches. And then, as if some unseen switch had been thrown, the temperature dropped. Not a gentle shift, but a sharp plummet, as if the sun itself had been snuffed out. My breath came out in pale fog. My husband glanced at me, brow furrowed. Something wasn't right. I started packing up when the sound hit high, metallic, shrill, like steel grinding on steel, or some monstrous hinge forced open. It cut through the woods so sharply that I felt it in my teeth. My husband jerked his head toward the ridgeline maybe 150 yards away. Something was moving there. At first I thought it was a man upright tall, the silhouette almost human, but it moved wrong, too fast, too jerky. The shadows bent strangely around it, making it hard to pin down details, but what I saw has never left me. It was tall, it's taller than any man I've ever seen. Its arms are maybe wings stretching out wide. Not feathers, not fur, but leathery, membranous like something half-formed between bat and dragon. I swear I saw them span 12 feet across as it jerked along the ridge. My chest tightened. Every part of me screamed to run. We bolted from the blind, stumbling over roots and rocks, our gear clattering behind us. That screech followed, you circling, echoing, closer then farther, like it was toying with us. By the time we slammed the cabin door shut, my hands were trembling so badly I could hardly turn the lock. That night, Gus dropped by with a load of firewood, his lantern glowing against the windows. He stepped inside, and maybe it was the way my husband and I kept glancing at the windows, or maybe it was the silence hanging between us, but we told him. Not everything. The sound, the shape, the wings. The change in his face was immediate. His eyes narrowed, jaw set, and for a moment he just stood there, the woodpile still balanced in his arms. Then he asked very quietly exactly where we had seen it. When we told him, he put the wood down and sat heavily at the table. "Snallyghast," he said, his voice low, almost reverent. "You don't go near there again? Not at dawn. Not at dusk. Not ever." He told us about an old legend, half bird, half reptile, with wings that blackened the sky, a beak like metal, and tentacles that writhed like they had a mind of their own. Said people had been seeing it for over a century, always in the thick woods, always when the air turned strange. He swore it hunted in the hours between night and morning, and again as the sun dipped below the horizon. We laughed nervously, tried to play it off. Maybe it was just a big owl, the shadows playing tricks on us. But deep down, I knew Gus believed what he said. And worse, I knew he thought we had been lucky to come back at all. That night, long after Gus left, I lay awake listening to every groan of the cabin walls, every scratch of branches against the roof. And in the silence between those sounds, I kept waiting for that metallic shriek to cut through again. 5 years passed before it showed itself again. By then, the memory of that morning had dulled. We convinced ourselves it was nothing, just nerves and imagination fueled by local folklore. By November of 2020, the story was more like an inside joke between us, something we'd whisper about when the woods grew to still. But jokes have a way of souring when the punchline comes back to life. It was the last day of our trip. A thick fog smothered the forest, shrinking the world to no more than 40 yards in any direction. Even the sound of our boots seemed swallowed by the mist. We chose a familiar spot, a mile from the cabin, figuring we'd end the trip in comfort, close to where we knew the ground. The silence pressed down again, and then rustling, heavy, deliberate from a thicket ahead. My pulse quickened, rifle lifting, certain I was about to see a deer break through. But what stepped out wasn't anything meant for this earth. It was massive, hulking like a bear, but wrong in every proportion. Its neck stretched long, ending in a beak that gleamed faintly, like polished steel catching the fog-filtered light. Its body crouched low on 4 legs that bent like a lizard's, unnerving in their angles. And from its shoulders sprouted 6 tendrils, each twisting slowly in the air, as if tasting, searching. We didn't breathe. I could hear my heartbeat in my ears, feel the cold sweat beating under my coat. The creature moved with purpose, scanning the ground, its throat vibrating with that same metallic shriek I'd prayed never to hear again. And then it stopped. Its head jerked up. That glinting beak snapped in our direction. Shouldn't have seen us. We were downwind, hidden, silent. But somehow it knew. My husband fumbled for his phone, trying to capture proof. His hands shook so badly I thought the sound of the plastic casing rattling would give us away. He never even touched the shutter. The thing reared up, rising higher and higher until it seemed to stretch above the trees. Leathery wings unfurling with a sound like canvas tearing. They spread wide, dragon-like, blotting out the mist above. The shriek it released rattled the blind around us, made my vision blur with the sheer force of it. And then it lunged. Not at us, but past us, into the fog, its wings slicing the air so close I could feel the wind of its passage on my face. In seconds, it was gone, swallowed by the mist, leaving only silence so thick I thought I might choke on it. We stayed frozen for what felt like hours before bolting for the cabin. My husband's phone never captured a thing. His finger had hovered useless above the screen. We left that morning, never saying goodbye to Gus, never even looking back at the cabin. On the drive home, we dug through every mention we could find. Old papers, local folklore. The same threads kept surfacing: tentacles, metallic beak, leathery wings, stretching 20 feet wide, the shriek of iron grinding. Some accounts spoke of a single eye glowing like coal, others of a hunger that never stopped. Every description was close enough to twist my stomach into knots. But the part that chills me most? Every story ended the same way. It was always searching, always hunting. We haven't gone back. Sometimes when I step outside at night, the air sharp with cold and the world wrapped in silence, I think I hear it. That metallic screech, distant but drawing closer, reminding me that what waits in the dark doesn't forget. And neither should I. I grew up thinking the world outside our porch was simple. A creek that laughed over rocks, dirt roads that smelled like old summer, and a sky so big it made every worry small. Inside the house, things were smaller, sharper voices that cut through paper-thin walls. The clack of the heater in winter, the hush after an argument like the room itself holding its breath. My father worked nights in a factory, and mother worked mornings at a gas station. Money was a thin seam between us, and quiet. When I was 6, the seam split open. Their fights became a map I learned to read. Slammed doors meant I should stay in my room. Low voices meant I should pretend to sleep. Sometimes I would press my face into the pillow and wish one of them would simply stop yelling and start listening to me instead. One cold fall night, something tugged me awake. At first I thought it was my mother, her hair loose over one shoulder, the familiar slope of her back in that old nightgown. She touched my shoulder with a fingertip that felt like the end of a winter twig, and without speaking, signaled me to follow. In the dark, she moved toward my window. Our windows were old, warped with weather. They stuck unless you put your whole weight into them, yet that one was open a crack, cool air pressing across the sill. She leaned out and beckoned, patient as a porch light. When I climbed onto the sill, the world smelled like wet leaves and something else, metal maybe, or old pennies. The cold hit me, and then black. I woke on the other side of the sill, curled in the dirt beneath my bedroom window, my pajamas damp and stained, small scratches like tally marks along my arms. My parents were frantic, faces drawn and pale under streetlight. I asked my mother why she made me sleep outside, and she looked at me like I'd told a joke I didn't remember learning. She said the window had been nailed shut for years. She had never left it open. Dad checked the frame and ran his hands along it like a man feeling for a bruise. We hammered the wood until it was solid again. Everyone breathed differently after that, as if the house had been stamped with a new, nervous rhythm. Time softened the edges of those nights. By the time I was 12, things had a different rhythm. Counseling. A new job for Dad. Dinners that didn't end with glass plates in the sink. They smiled and walked out the door on date nights, the kind of smiles people put at the ends of sentences to prove something is okay. I grew taller faster than anyone noticed and learned how to hide in comic books and video games. Being ignored becomes a loud thing when you're a kid. Silence can sound like someone closing a door on purpose. So one September Friday, I decided to make them notice. I packed crackers, a flashlight, my Game Boy, and the jacket that smelled like campfires, and left the house before dawn, intending to hide in the woods until dusk and come back like a surprise. The woods around our house were generous then pines that kept secrets, a creek that folded in half under roots. I climbed my favorite tree and played until the sun leaned. Then I heard steps, careful, human-shaped, not the soft scuff of deer, but the sure tread of someone who knew the path. I called Dad, and the sound died like a thrown stone. The trees held their breath. A hush laid itself over the leaves. I wandered, following the creek, as though I could track back to where I belonged. My Game Boy turned to black. I looked up and saw my mother, red sweater, hair in the same lazy knot, the angle of her shoulders exactly like hers. Her face was a shadow. She jerked her head in a motion that was not her own, fingers long in the wrong places. She didn't speak. She only beckoned. I followed because kids do what they think will fix things. I told her I was sorry for running away, that I wanted them to notice me, that I would come back. Her hands moved like a puppet's, pointing deeper into the trees. The world narrowed to the rhythm of my breath and the slow, wrong sway of her shoulders. Then the ground opened. I stepped where there had been earth and slid into a ravine like a hidden mouth. Rocks took my weight. I tumbled and felt my skin tear on branches, as if the woods itself wanted to keep me. When I stopped, the sky was a sliver. I yelled until my voice cracked into pieces no one could find. Night settled like a lid. My flashlight faded. I crawled and clung and finally fell asleep against the rough skin of a root, the cold pressing into my bones. I woke to the sensation of being held by something that was not warm. A breath on my cheek was colder than December. I looked up into a face that wanted to be my mother. Espet had forgotten the map of a human face. No eyes that caught light, no soft slope of a nose, only a wide lipless grin that was bent in a way a real mouth never would be. It watched me without thinking. For a second I thought it might say my name. It didn't. It dissolved into the air like smoke, and then, impossibly, a flashlight cut through the trees and my father's voice broke the dark. They found me, my mother sobbing into my jacket, my father muttering thanks until his words turned brittle. The paramedics wrapped me in blankets. I told the story about the woman in my mother's clothes and the window that opened itself and the thing with the smile. My parents pulled at the edges of what I said like men trying to smooth out a wrinkle. Later, neighbors whispered about children who had wandered into those woods and never come back. My father's jaw tightened at the sound of those whispers. We moved a year later. I left behind the creek and the pine, but I took the memory with me like a scar that hummed when it rained. The thing that led me still lived in the way the air smelled in late September, in how windows seemed to breathe at night. By the end of that year, I learned never to follow a familiar shape into a place that feels empty. Moving should have closed the chapter. A new house, new wallpaper, a new school that never knew about the ravine. For a time, it worked like slapping a lid on a jar that won't quite seal. I slept better, grew taller, learned that time could sand down a memory until it almost fit in your pocket. But some things are not sand, they are seeds. They bury themselves where you least expect and wait for conditions to turn cold again. My dreams started as small intruders. A hand at the edge of a window, the smell of wet leaves at noon. I would wake with the taste of dirt and the echo of that grin at the back of my throat. At 14, I met Tara, my cousin, who babysat me sometimes and watched cartoons like she could pause the world. She noticed the scratches on my arms that never quite faded and the way I flinched when doors creaked. "You don't talk about it," she said once, and it felt like the lid had been lifted. I told her the parts I could say without vomiting the memory. The window, the grin, the way the woods felt like lungs. She didn't laugh. She told me children in town sometimes woke up in odd places or didn't come home at all, and that adults often pretended those facts were not tied to the same thorned path. The phrase, "some things want children," floated between us like a rumor that needed to be true. The next years were a blurred geography of small victories and sudden alarms. Friends who moved. The hushed conversation at school about a boy who vanished for a week and came back with eyes that did not match his face the time my mother stopped. Humming the same lullaby, and hummed a tune that slid the wrong way through the room. I trained myself to notice tiny mismatches, the way a sweater hung wrong, the way a voice took a step that wasn't its own. Little details are how you tell the truth when everything else wants to lie. Once I found a smear of dirt under the edge of our new windowsill, teeny like the soil in the Revenant. My stomach turned into a fist. I cleaned it and set up a box fan that whirred through the night, because motion feels like protection. One summer, driven by something that was equal parts curiosity and a hunger for closure, I went back. I drove until the air smelled like the houses I remembered, walked the road as if it would remember me. The woods looked ordinary, sunlight pooling on leaves, a fox trail, a creek that was still singing. The ravine was clearer now, less of a secret. I found my old tree, and the scratch marks on its bark like fingerprints. There were toys half buried near the creek-faded plastic that belonged to no longer small hands. I should have left. Instead, I followed a set of small footprints that angled away from the water and toward the house I had once lived in. They stopped at my old window and then nothing. No prints beyond the sill. No sign of a way out. That night, I slept in the car in the driveway, the engine quiet and useless as a heartbeat. At 3 a.m, I woke because the air in the car smelled like pennies and wet leaves. A shape stood under my old window, and for a moment the world shrank to a single breath. It wore my mother's red sweater, the sleeve threadbare, the same careless knot at the throat. It didn't move like a person. It tilted its head in the way a thing learning a sound might tilt its head, as if trying to match a memory. The grin showed in the moonlight, lipless, patient. I wanted to scream, my throat was a fist of cold. But the shape simply lifted a hand and made the motion I remembered from when I was 6. Come here. I learned then what it means to be chosen by something that mistakes repetition for belonging. It follows the pattern of what it wants. A parent, a path, the lull of familiarity. It does not hunger for flesh so much as for the small, soft things that carry trust. I realized the thing had not wanted to scare me away. It wanted me to stay. It wanted, in the only way it knew, to be kept. I drove away and did not return for a long time. I let the town shrink into background noise, let different seasons breed different ghosts. Years later, as an adult who could buy breakfast without my father's permission, I met someone and learned what it meant to share a pillow. The ordinary miracles of adulthood's steady paychecks, a car that didn't leak, made the old hunger feel like a superstition. Then, one evening when rain made the street sheen like black glass, I was making tea and glanced up at my window. For a second I thought it was outside my mother's shape, the red sweater folded over a crook of shadow. I froze. The silhouette did not belong to the house across the street. It belonged to the place that had once been mine. My hands went numb. I could not tell if my heart was pounding or pounding me. I opened the window a crack because curiosity pulls like a sore tooth. On the sill there was a smear of dirt exactly where my small hands had rested those many years ago. Threaded through it, like a joke left in plain sight, was the frayed cuff of a child's jacket mine. The jacket I had packed when I ran away and never thought to keep. My mind jumped like a trapped bird, assembling and disassembling possibilities until I found a pattern. There was no way to be sure. There was no way to prove it. But I knew, with the same certainty I had felt when the grin looked at me, that the thing did not die with distance. It learned the rhythm of leaving and the shape of our returns. That night I dreamed of a window opening without hands, of a figure sliding out like smoke, and of a child who climbed and climbed until the night itself closed its teeth. I woke with the taste of dirt in my mouth and the sound of someone humming, softly and off-key, a lullaby I had not heard since I was 6. I turned, and the room was dark, but behind the glass the street lamp painted a long shadow. It moved, and in that moving, I glimpsed the wrongness again. The sweep of a shoulder that was almost my mother's, the tilt of a head that was learning how to be human. It raised a hand and made a small, patient beckon. I'll tell you something I wish I didn't know. When something learns how to be the person you trust, it can wait a very long time. It waits until your voice softens, until your attention thins, until you mistake the imitation for truth. I closed the curtains and sat very still, listening to a lullaby that crept under the fabric of the house. My phone lay on the table, its screen dark. I did not call anyone. I watched the outline of the window, as if watching might make the shape go away. Instead, the silhouette pressed its face to the glass, that lipless grin spreading like a secret agreed upon a long time ago. It cupped my childhood jacket in its hands, and, in a voice that was almost mine, almost my mother's, it whispered, "Come with me." The words were soft and patient, like an invitation and like a verdict. I could not move. Outside, the trees bent toward the house as if listening. Inside, something I had tried to lock away in the dirt of the ravine stepped closer, patient as weather. The final thing I saw before the curtains snapped shut was the reflection of that grinta crescent moons, leaning toward each other, staring back at me from the dark glass like a promise that the woods had kept after all. The night the laughing started is the reason I still sleep with the back door locked, even when the kids are upstairs and the TV is on. When I think back, the memory doesn't begin with the scream or the running. It starts with the smell of smoke and old beer, and the lazy way a bonfire opens a town-sized hole in the dark. Bonfires were ritual in my family. My Uncle Hank showed up like clockwork with a cooler and a guitar that had seen better days, and for a few hours the backyard turned into a small country fair of voices and light. The adults fell into their patterns. The same jokes, same half-serious stories, the same easy cruelty at one another's expense. We kids were minor characters, shoelaces and marshmallows, shooshed to bed while the grown-ups kept their talk for the dark. I was 9 that summer, shoved under blankets with the window a slit open to hold the heat and the distant crackle. The house hummed with the low friction of an evening winding down, folding chairs scraping, a radio comforting itself between songs, the occasional slurred promise to tell a good story later. I can still feel the way the screen seemed to breathe, a thin skin between my room and the yard where Hank's fire threw tongues of orange. I wasn't trying to be brave. I was exactly the sort of kid who listened for the last notes before sleep took him, hoping to catch whatever grown-up line would make tomorrow worth remembering. Then the sound shifted. It wasn't the kind of sound that announces itself. It arrived like a stain spreading. Someone yelling, not angry but sudden and alarmed. Steps cutting across gravel, a door smacking. My heart did that weird springing thing kids' hearts do because something had changed the shape of the night. I pressed my face to the screen and peered out. The fire glowed. Shadows lunged and shrank. Voices rose and fell. Hank and Dad were out there somewhere. Voices closed and then guttered. A slammed door sent a hollow clack into the quiet, then running. Fast, light feet that didn't belong to men who had been drinking and talking all evening. They came in breathing hard and laughing, the kind of laughter that can't decide if it's relief or hysterical. It made sense on the surface. A joke gone wrong. Someone spooked by an animal. Boys playing at terror. That was the story adults tell themselves to sleep easier. They locked a door, threw a blanket on a chair, and the yard cooled with empty space. I tried to sleep because I knew the rules. Go to bed. Don't listen to the grown-up ghosts. And soon, I fell back into the soft, shallow dark of a child's dreams. Years collected themselves in the way they always do. I had kids, a house with creaks that sounded professional, a pair of knees that ached in places I didn't know could. The bonfire night sat in my head like a pebble in a shoe. Small, persistent, impossible to ignore when I thought about it too long. One evening, 36 and reckless with the comfort of adulthood, I made pizza and popped a movie for the kids. Hank arrived. Same wide gate, same beat-up guitar wrapped in the smell of old beer. Between slices and the Spider-Man noise the kids made at the big screen, a memory bumped up against me. I tossed it like a small coin and asked the kind of question that makes grown men trade trophies. Hey, remember that night at Mom and Dad's when you and Dad came in laughing but sounded spooked? Hank's grin cut across his face like a match strike. He lifted his beer and squinted at me like a man deciding whether to pull a good prank. You remember that? Man, he watched my kids for a beat, then leaned in like the story deserved private air. He told it slow, the way men tell things that confirm who they used to be. We were hammered, he said, fire nearly out, swapping work stories. Out of nowhere, this little guy runs out of the trees. 2 feet tall, tops, not a kid. A man, if you can call him, that wearing this pointy red hat, nose like a hook, ears stretched like someone used them for hanging things. He charged the fire yelling, spitting nonsense the whole time. Not words I knew. Sounded mad. It should have been ridiculous. Should have landed like a campfire tall tale, something to laugh about and forget. Hank's voice wasn't doing that. He kept looking at me like I might call him out, but the set of his jaw made the lie feel heavy. We ran, he said. We ran like idiots. We locked the door. Next morning, hungover, we look out. No prints. Nothing. Like he was never there. Dad later confirmed the outline of the night, in the only way men sometimes do. With a grunt and a look that suggested the moment had been filed away under something best not discussed. When they said Pixie or gnome, it passed easily into the category of folklore. People like to pin things to names. Names tame what otherwise slips free, but names didn't hold in the quiet. I heard the detail that didn't add up and couldn't let it go. The running, and the breathless laughter that carried the wrong note for mere drunkenness, and a mourning that wiped away evidence as if it had never been. That is where the sensible story ends and the waiting begins. Time doesn't tidy memory, it stains it. The bonfire night lived inside me the way a half-remembered song lives. A melody missing its chorus, tugging at you until you hum it out loud. I started noticing small, useless things. A child's shoe at the edge of the woods during afternoon walks. Tiny handprints on low trunks that were always just out of reach, and once a red smear on the old fence post that could have been paint or rust, and then was gone by the next day. My sleep sharpened. The door lock habit became ritual. My children learned to laugh at the way I checked windows twice, 3 times, like the world needed that small, nervous policing. I asked Dad once, blunt and stupid, "You ever see him again?" He looked at me the way men look at small storms. "You know there are S-water coming, but you've already decided not to bring in the laundry." "No," he said. "We never saw him." That was the whole ugly thing. Hank, when pressed, would smile and change the subject, which was always how one avoids looking into the real shape of something. Then one autumn, the woods started giving up secrets. The neighbor's dog vanished for a day and reappeared thin and quiet 3 houses down, tail tucked. Little toys that had been left by the tree line showed up at our back steps in odd arrangements. A single shoe tied to a branch. A broken doll propped like a sentinel. My wife brushed it off as pranksters or kids with nothing better to do. I wanted to believe her. I also wanted to be honest with my skin. The night it became impossible to call coincidence, we had another small fire in the yard. My kids were asleep, the kind of perfect, oblivious sleep parents pay for with their own unease. Hank had come by because habits are stubborn, and because now, after all these years, the bonfire ritual had a way of bridging time. The moon was a coin behind clouds. The fire made islands of people and wrapped their faces in moving light. We talked about work, about the kids' schools, about ordinary things that tend to last longer than promises. Then Hank told the story again, and this time it was different. He didn't tell it to be funny. He told it to see if I would look at him and know we were both remembering the same dark. There was a noise at the edge of the yard, a soft tapping like someone with small boots walking on dry leaves. We all paused because the sound fit the night the way a missing brick fits a wall. I smiled, taut and useless, and said something to keep things bright. The tapping stopped. A shadow moved between trees. I felt the old childish urge to look out the window, to check the place between my house and the woods where a 2-foot figure might vanish into moon-damp grass. I told myself it was a raccoon. I told myself everything that kept me under the warm blanket of grown-up denial. Then it came out of the dark, and everything private and unspoken rearranged itself into a new shape. It stood on the lawn a few yards from the firelight, small enough that my first angry Snallyghast adult brain tried to consolingly call it a child, until my second, older part cataloged the wrongness. The hat was a pointed red thing, dull and dirt-smudged. The face was too flat and too sharp at once, like paper folded into a face. The eyes reflected the fire but were too quick, the way hunted things are. It made a sound that was almost laugh and almost cry, and then it spoke in a string of syllables that matched no tongue. I knew. a babble like leaves skittering across pavement when you walk too fast. For a moment, everything stopped. My hand tightened around my beer so hard, the aluminum left a print. Hank's face had gone colorless. My children's room light blinked in the house as if the world was holding its breath. The creature moved with an energy that was wrong for a human body. Sudden darts, sudden freezes, like the pattern of an animal that knows small, precise killings. It reached the edge of the firelight and tossed something, a small object that hit the grass with a soft, deliberate plop. I went forward because a ridiculous and dangerous piece of me wanted to see what it was. It was a toy soldier. The plastic leg scarred from a blow that hadn't happened in my house, but somewhere else to someone else. The thing tilting its head at us held that tiny object like a gift and a warning at the same time. We did not react with bravado. We reacted with a human thing older than stories. We retreated. Not all at once, but like water stepping back from sudden heat. We shut the door and locked it, and the sound of our locking was small and useless and pure. The creature stayed put at the lawn's edge, and then, as if someone had called it, turned and vanished between the trees. No footprints, no bent grass. The morning again offered the same clean erasure, but the toy remained on the lawn the next day, face up, like a dare. After that, the world acquired a seam. Where I had been unremarkable and safe, now there was a strip of the night stitched with small, deliberate wrongness. Toys moved. Shadows arranged themselves. Once I found, tucked under the doormat, a tiny red hat the size of a thumb. Another time my son woke up crying and said a small man had peeked through his window and smiled. My wife started sleeping with the blanket over her face more and more. My jokes about the woods died like embers. I thought the worst that could happen would be a story told in a kitchen, a warning to keep the kids inside. I was wrong in the slow way men are with things they don't want to admit. The creature's visits grew bolder, or perhaps we grew smaller. It began leaving things that were not toys. A tooth from an animal I couldn't identify, curl of hair not from any of our heads, a smear of something that smelled like wet leaves and old rain. It never touched the kids. It never came into the house. But it arranged the outside so that when my children played near the tree line, their games stumbled into silence, and they preferred to come inside before the light left the yard. The twist isn't a loud one. It's quiet, and it sits in the mouth like iron. One morning I found a small, careful ring of stones placed around our mailbox. In the center, propped up on 3 of them, was a photograph of my youngest, taken just last week from the sidewalk while he fed bread to the sparrows. His face was mid-laugh, eyes closed, hair drifted by a breeze. The picture was not new to me. I had a copy on my phone, but the way it had been stolen from the world and set there, like an offering and a map both, changed everything. Hank insisted we move. Dad said nothing and went to work like nothing had happened. I called the police, and they were polite and then distant, as if there are categories of reports they file behind and then go on with the garbage of their own lives. That night, I slept with my back to the door and the light on. At 2:14 a.m., the smoke alarm chirped like a small animal. I jolted awake and froze. From the hallway, a small sound, like a child's shoe clicking on floorboard, moved toward the kitchen. I thought, for the briefest fragment of a breath, that it was a nightmare. I counted my heartbeats, and when I couldn't slow them down, I stood. The kitchen light was off. The back window showed only the black of the yard and a strip of clouded moon. On the counter, laid out like a message, was a tiny, folded scrap of paper. I walked to it because curiosity has always been my cruelest virtue. It opened easily in my hand. On the paper was a child S scrawl I knew immediately, my son S handwriting from the photo. The blunt, looping letters of a child who is learning the world. It read, "I went to see him. The house seems too loud at times after that." I pretend the note was a trick, or a prank, or some fragile archival coincidence. I tell myself the creature wanted to play a game, or to warn, or to be noticed. But the paper in my hand trembled with a meaning that had teeth. The laugh we heard that night at 9, old, breathless, unplaceable, might have been their laughter, not ours. And somewhere in the dark, something that thinks in the size of a child's hand and the patience of a forest keeps collecting the pieces. of our ordinary life and arranging them on the lawn like a museum of small threats. I lock the door. I pull the curtain shut, watch the trees and wait, and I know. The thing that visited once to scare drunk men has been studying what it takes to be human. And it is patient enough to come back, not to frighten, but to learn how to belong. Change log hook, rewrite. Opened with a visceral, immediate image. The night the laughing started, ... To grab attention and set an eerie tone from the first line, replacing the original slow recall opening. This creates instant curiosity and dread. Structure and length. Expanded the original anecdote into 2 continuous parts, approximately 770 and approximately 730 words. To meet the requested approximately 1,500 word target, each part maintaining uninterrupted narration and no internal headings or section breaks. Pacing adjustments. Part 1 builds atmosphere slowly. Sensory details: smoke, beer, guitar, domestic rituals, and a child's perspective, and crescendos to the ambiguous spooky event and adult recollection. Ending with a lingering, unresolved question to peak suspense. Part 2 escalates tension faster. Recurring signs, increased boldness of sightings, concrete eerie offerings, and the final intimate threat, the photograph and scrawled note, to quicken the pace toward the cliffhanger. Suspense enhancements. Inserted quiet before the storm. Beats moments of denied explanation and domestic normalcy. Before each reveal to heighten contrast and impact. Repeated small, uncanny details: toys moved, tiny hat, arranged objects, to build a pattern that feels deliberate and sinister. Cinematic language and emotional depth. Replace generic phrases with sensory. Textured imagery, for example. Islands of people seem, museum of small threats, and emphasized psychological reactions, sleep habits, locking rituals, the weight of male silence so the narration reads naturally for voiceover, while conveying emotional stakes. Voiceover optimization, used short, punchy sentences for tension and longer flowing sentences for atmosphere to create natural pause points and emphasis suited to a narration. Kept vocabulary accessible, U.S. English, while preserving cinematic descriptors. Safety and policy. Removed any graphic or gory elements, focusing instead on dread, implication, and psychological horror to remain YouTube policy safe while maximizing creepiness. Line paragraph constraints. Shared paragraphs are moderate in length and continuous narration is preserved so the script is read smoothly by a single narrator without headings or breaks.